How do you build a culture of quality rather than making quality a part of the responsibilities of an individual or a team? This is something that Jess and I have both dealt with over the years in our careers. And this episode might be a little bit more focused on a technology division than some of our previous episodes, just because that's our experience. But over the next few minutes, we're going to go through a lot of the things we've seen that have worked, things that didn't work, and as usual, hopefully we'll get tactical and practical and give you some takeaways that we've seen work and things that you can start working on immediately to really impact the colleague experience and the ultimate success and quality of the product that you're producing. So this is Plays Well with Others, our podcast about building and participating in highly effective teams, episode 31. So hang out with us as we talk about quality and culture and how to make that really operational. So let's go ahead and roll the intro and we'll be right back. This is Plays Well with Others. Thanks for listening. All right. So we said we're trying to answer the question of how do you build a culture of quality? I feel like I should explain myself a little bit when I talk about quality and what I mean by culture of quality. So quality in product engineering, obviously we track through escape defects and the ultimate value of a feature that we deliver to a production environment, deliver to a customer or a client. But this really could apply to any organization or any team that is producing a product, whether it be physical manufacturing or if it's an actual piece of software or potentially even a service. And what I mean by a culture of quality is we're kind of getting back to our roots of Plays Well with Others. So in the product engineering space, there's this idea of a developer builds a piece of software and then sends it to production, and then it's not their problem anymore, right? So you have an operations team that's responding to things, or you have a support staff that's responding to issues, and the developer's the one that gets into the office at 8:00 and says, "Oh, cool! I've got an email. There's a defect. Let me look at this." After 5 people have been up all night trying to get the application back up and running. Now, I don't mean to be disparaging. I am a developer myself, so I can say that, but it is kind of a reality. So when I say culture of quality, what I mean is to say that you have a default setting across your entire team, your entire organization, where everyone, regardless of their function, regardless of their role, is focused on making the best possible product as they can, whether that be the product organization on feature intake and feature description and acceptance criteria, or going through feature engineering. They're building the thing, they're testing the thing, and then going into the post-production support, the individuals that are picking up the ball with customers, with users, and making sure that the thing continues to run. All of those work together, and it's not always how it is in the real world. So,
have you ever seen that comic where it's the different tree swings that's based on the different visuals? So what the customer asked for, the requirements that were written, the documentation that was done, what the engineer built, what the QA tested, and et cetera, et cetera. And each picture is just wildly different. It gets to the crux of the problem because you're looking at it from a perspective that is not expanded. You're looking at it from a siloed perspective. And that, I think, is the key to having the culture of quality that you're talking about, is you break down the silos and you share experiences and understanding.
I think you're right. And if I can figure out a way to link to that image, I'll put them down in the show notes, because if you haven't seen it at this point,
it's hilarious.
Especially if you're in the product engineering discipline, you should see it, because it's one of those that's both hilarious and sad at the same time. Like, yes,
it's accurate, but it hurts.
Yes, yeah, that's it exactly. So true, but dang. All right.
Didn't need to be called out quite so early.
Yeah, it's still, I don't have any coffee on my desk. I don't know what's that could either be good or bad. But so as I was thinking about this question, so as a software engineering leader, I've been faced with the question or the challenge of organizing a software engineering team, and in almost every case, I come to the conclusion that quality is optimized when you have developers and your testers, your QA on the same team. Because we've seen
I agree.
issues when you have QA in a different department or on a different team on an independent, it becomes sort of a pipeline, developers throwing stuff over the wall at QA. Then what you have done, whether intentional or not, is you have made a conflict. Because and I've seen it in performance reviews, I've seen it in people being denigrated, saying you're not doing good enough job as a QA tester because you're not finding enough defects, or your escape defect rate is huge, which means QA, you're falling down, you're failing. And then on the same token, it's a developer's goal to write code that gets the acceptance criteria down and ideally doesn't have bugs in it. So if Jess is
Automatically, you're in conflict.
right, if Jess is a tester and I'm a developer, then if a thing gets to production successfully, one of us didn't do our job.
It's immediately in conflict, constantly in conflict. Yeah, it's and it's interesting because that feels like it should be common sense, but it is a little bit of a hot take because there are a lot of companies that segregate them for the purpose of trying to prevent collusion or something between the two, and it directly impacts the success rate of your product.
Right. And I see the perspective, and it's I think here's the second part of my hot take. I think the reason we separate QA and dev and other just about any other practice is because we develop career pathing wrong. So you have these people
Interesting.
that are good QA testers, good QA analysts that want to progress in their career. So they, senior QA, QA team lead, QA manager, QA director, QA VP of quality. And so you have to develop this career path, which implies that this person that is really good at their job needs to be a director level of QA. And we've said that, well, if you're going to be a director of QA, then you have to have direct reports, and those direct reports are QA people. And the same thing happens in the software engineering, the development space. You progress in your career, and we create departments and we create teams, and by nature we start siloing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not wrong, I don't think, but it is a weird assumption that we make that because you are good at your job, you should also be good at leading people that do your job. And
Yeah, they're
we
very different
also,
disciplines.
well, fair, but we also make the assumption that you can't lead people that don't do your job. I think that's a poor assumption, and it leads to silos, and it leads to these isolated organizations that are really only focused about the thing they care about, not the greater success of the product.
We've talked about this in earlier episodes too about how important it is to understand the perspectives of the different components of your team, because if you can put yourself in their shoes, you can understand better where they're coming from and therefore be a better team member to them, help support them. And it changes the focus of us versus them. Let's throw this over the wall and have them deal with their problem now, and becomes how do we solve this problem together? The problem now being how do we produce a good quality product? So I heard this story about a company that put into place for developers that if they had any defects in code, if they had any, what is it when you do the second level review, if it gets pushed back down to them after a peer review or something, is that what it's called?
Pull request, code review, peer review.
Yeah, if it gets pushed back down to them, then they get basically they get like some sort of demerits or something where if anything is wrong with their code, they get it pushed back down to them. And it created this really stilted environment where nobody was willing to innovate or willing to put themselves out there to potentially produce something that got a bad mark for them, that the only code they would produce was just very stilted, very basic, very redundant and repetitive. It was a smothering environment. It didn't last very long. And the
No
person I
kidding.
was talking to left the company along with an exodus of several others very quickly. But the point I'm trying to make is when you put anyone in a situation where they're constantly scrutinized for failing, you end up putting yourself in a position where you are ruining any opportunity for innovation and collaboration, because part of having a good successful team is knowing how to fail successfully, and I don't think that's possible if you have a team that's so fully siloed that they don't support each other and they can't communicate effectively and understand each other's perspectives. Because then you have what you're talking about, right, Andrew? You have developers who just want to get their code through to production. They don't care about anything else. You have an operations team who has no idea how to support what code is out there and are getting hamstrung by the new pushes that go out and constantly having to kill themselves to try and keep up with what the development team is doing. And there's no communication across the board. And, servers aren't set up to support what you have, or this isn't set up to do that. And QA is not looking at this problem because they're so focused on finding these defects. And you start to come apart at the seams.
Yeah. So it, as I think through this and try to figure out, okay, what's the answer, right? It's easy to come and throw rocks at the greenhouse and say, well, you shouldn't be promoting leadership in silos. You should be promoting product engineering or product development as a whole, as a function of the company. But how do you do that more effectively? How do you make sure that if you're making cross-functional teams, how do you make it so that you have expertise built into that team? And I go back to a soapbox that I've stood on many a time. We often in technology think of KPIs or performance management from a perspective of bottom up. Let me measure how many requests per second I get. Let me measure the average response time on an endpoint for an API, and let me track for anomaly detection. Let me see if that degrades or changes. And that's kind of where we put our blinders on. And we say, I want to make sure that my services are functional. Everything else is somebody else's problem. Now, it's not often that bad, but we do focus on the technical aspects, not fully understanding that it doesn't matter how good or bad the application of the product works. What matters is the efficacy of the company as a whole. So I always have espoused change from thinking about app first to business first when it comes to your performance management. So
What do you mean by business first?
yeah. So let's take an example in the retail mortgage lending industry, because that's where I am. So that's where I'm going to use the examples. But ultimately, for us to call our business successful or profitable, we care about funded loans. How many loans did we fund today, this week, this month? How many applications did we take today, this week, this month? If we start there and call that the least granular performance measure of our company, of our lender, then you can see how everything, not just technology, impacts the success of the company. And you can drill down from there. So focus first on what's the measure of success for your company, and then start decomposing that. If a good example is FedEx. So everybody knows FedEx. They're a global company, so I think everybody should know FedEx. We've got like one listener in Europe, so I think everybody should know FedEx. If for some reason DHL, but I know for a fact that this is true about FedEx's business model. They have what we used to call application performance monitoring. Really, now it's an observability platform, because we've shifted as an industry from focusing on the granular application. There's my camera. Focusing on the granular application and focusing on the business success as a whole. We call it observability now. Just simple change in nomenclature. But they consume this product, and their executives have a dashboard that really has like three things. And those three tiers are their three pillars of business, whether it be fulfillment, whether it be product sales, or there's a third one probably.
The other one,
The other
whatever
one.
that one is.
Yeah. And they look at this dashboard and it's red, yellow, green. Green is looking at overall throughput, very, very high level performance metrics. And so if I come in as the CEO of FedEx and I sit at my desk and I look and it says green, 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 okay, no worries. I'm going to go about my business. But if one of those is yellow or red, okay, well, I'm calling the guy that's over that respective discipline, and we're going to start drilling down until we see, oh, well, FedEx.com is down and nobody can track their packages, or whatever. Our barcoding system is broken and we can't check in packages. We can't get packages on trucks. But
I mean, that's really interesting because it really does. I mean, we've talked about a hierarchy of, goals before, right? We've talked about how if you have an overarching objective for your company or an overarching objective for your team, you can then take it down to more and more granular levels to break it apart to be successful, right? I mean, that's a huge component of some of the other podcasts that we've done, right? But that's really interesting because it really does allow you to, from a hierarchy perspective, separate out success or give success visibility that you can then kind of pull it down to another level. That's a really interesting way of approaching leadership reporting because it's not overwhelming. It doesn't mean you can't be overwhelmed by it. Doesn't mean you don't have the granularity, but it just means that you have a full roll up that really gives you a high level. That's actually cool.
yeah, and what it does and why this is important for the culture of quality conversation is the end goal of making a quality product is accomplished by everyone understanding their role in producing that product and why it's important.
Yeah.
I've had this conversation with developers about, you don't just want to finish the ticket. You don't just want to say, well, the acceptance criteria is good. You want to understand what is the impact to your end user and to your business unit by deploying this feature, because you may have a different perspective, or as you're making any of the 5,000 implementation decisions, you may have an opportunity to set yourself up for success in the future just because you know this is why this particular feature is important. I can now see that you're probably going to ask for XYZ next, or I'm going to suggest XYZ next. So you're setting yourself up for success.
So spinning off of that idea a little bit, you understand your role, you have responsibility for your executables, etc. I think it is also compounded with you have respect for the roles of others as well, and understanding of the roles of others as well. Because I've noticed a much better continuity of team, of process when you have a development team that understands, respects, and appreciates what their QA analysts do for them. You have QA analysts who understand, appreciate, and respect what the developers are doing. You have a product team who understands, respects, and appreciates what your development team is capable of. There are unfortunately product teams that can be pretty frustrating for developers to work with because they solution without the developer in the room, and they come to them and they tell them to execute something without potentially understanding the perspective of a development mindset. And that can be really, I almost said toxic, but I don't think that's the right word. I think catastrophic is maybe the better word, because you really are setting yourself up for future failure if you're not thinking through the technical ramifications of the decisions you're making. You're just trying to solution to what you understand as a product owner. So it really is that additional step of not only do you understand and you understand and you support your role, but you really have a grasp of why other people are important within the process within the organization. That changes, I think, the ability for people to work successfully together.
Well, yeah, and it's, we've talked about respecting and understanding the various roles, but I think the cohesion there is not necessarily just product understanding dev and dev understanding QA and vice versa and all manner of those permutations. It's really, do all of your functions, do all of your teams understand the purpose of the company, the product?
Mm-hmm.
Because then you have a shared goal, a shared responsibility, and it's not just my responsibility is keeping this database up. It's like the guy in Lost that types in the code every 24 hours. Like, this is what I do. Well, yeah, but how does that
How does that
influence your
impact everything
success?
else?
We talk in, we've had multiple episodes where we talked about your why. Why do you do what it is that you do? And each of us have a different skill set. Like, I don't particularly care to do Jess's job because I'm not very good at it, or at least definitely not as good as she is with it. But I like I like code. I like tech. I like building and engineering things. I don't necessarily love the, call it the social intricacy and the detail management that Jess and product people do. But that's not to say that's not important. It's just to say there are people out there that are better at it than I am, but neither one of our roles are terribly successful without the other.
Absolutely.
Like, you can make as many user stories in the world as you want, but unless you have an engineer to build towards the user story, it's just a slip of paper. And on the other hand, you can have as many developers in the world and they can build stuff for sure, but unless you have somebody that can run that translation layer, you have a lot of overhead and communication and what's actually being built and how it's being built in a priority manner. So having that opportunity for everyone to speak the same language and say, even though I'm a junior developer or I'm a junior product owner, or I've been here 2 days, I can say, look, our mission is to, my mission as I understand it, is to allow my company to manufacture loans successfully, get people into houses, get people's financial situations in a better place than it was 2 weeks ago. So how does what you're asking me to do drive towards that?
And I think there you kind of hit on that psychological need that most humans have to become a part of something bigger than themselves, right? I mean, that's just that biology component within our brains of we want to be a part of a group. We want to belong to something. We want to believe in something. We want to have a shared experience with those around us. That's just part of being human. And when a company chooses to in, make a environment where their colleagues are a part of their mission statement and they understand their contribution to that mission statement, you start to get into a situation where you become invested in what your company is doing, what they're you're biting off what they're selling, right? And that's a positive thing, especially as you're spending how much of your day at work? I mean, I would say 8 hours, but let's be honest, it's more like 10 hours a day you're spending at work, 5 days a week. So, if why would I do that if it's not for a company that I get to participate in what they're trying to accomplish as a whole, a company that I can care about and support and invest myself into and feel that I'm appreciated and that what I'm doing matters in the grander scheme of things, no matter whether what I'm doing is just testing a piece of code or, being the CEO of the company. Each role has value and merit and a place within the organization that is very important.
Right. So let's bring her back around for a sort of a finishing pass here. We said we'd try to get tactical and practical and give you some takeaways. I've mentioned the manager's handbook probably in every episode since I bought the book. So if you haven't bought it already, David Dotson, it's on Amazon. It'll probably be here by 5 p.m. today if you order it now. But if you haven't gotten it already, I highly recommend it, no matter whether you're an aspiring manager, aspiring leader, or a current leader of varying levels of seniority. I think there's something in there for everybody. But one comment that stuck with me is when he was asked, why did you make another management book? Because there's tons. He said, a lot of the way that I see these leadership self-help books or these management books is that they're kind of theoretical. And he wanted to create something that you could start, no matter if you started in the middle of the book or the beginning or the end, you could pick up something that you could start doing tomorrow. And so let's try to take that back for building a culture of quality. I think I've got a perspective of, I'm going to say a list of 3, and I hope I get to 3 by the time I get there, but you know me by now. I like my bulleted lists. But so number 1, you really have to make sure that everyone has a shared purpose. Everyone knows where they fit in the organization, in the company, and the goal of the organization. And number 2, we talked about not siloing ourselves from an organizational perspective just because you have expertise in one particular function doesn't mean you don't have capability to lead a more cross-functional team. And I would say ask yourself the question, is my organization organized? Is my team organized in a way that is allowing individuals to influence the quality of the product? Or is the quality of the product having to be influenced by someone at the director or VP level? And then we'll say 3, I think at the end of the day, as long as you are doing the first 2, so communicating the shared purpose and making sure that you only have silos where they're really necessary. Number 3, make sure you're tracking success in the right way. Don't track success primarily at the team level or at the function level. Track success as a company. And that can be, you have to get creative, but that's more than revenue. That's more than profit. Drill it down just a little bit to the primary drivers of your product. What are the big rock business tiers that you can track? And then how do you make sure that those are on track on a daily basis or an hourly basis?
So, just a little caveat on the tracking component. Having good metrics and knowing what those good metrics are is absolutely paramount to a business. However, how you handle the information that you have, I think, is just as equally important to building a team of quality. And it goes back to what we were talking about before of how are you holding your team accountable to achieving their goals? Are you doing it in such a way that you're giving them a place where they can fail successfully to quickly recover and push out better things if something does go wrong? Are you supporting them in a way that is productive? Or are you setting your teams up against each other? Are you, being pedantic about weird measurements that maybe are a portion of the whole, but not capturing the essence of what you're actually trying to achieve? So you not only have to figure out which numbers are the right numbers to look at, you also need to be careful with how you're managing to those numbers. And I think there's a whole other episode we could probably dig in to talk about how do you find those 2 things, but how you handle the information you have is just as important as having the right information.
150% yes. So you the pushing out a KPI initiative is really, really hard, because not only do you have to make sure you're tracking the right KPIs at the business level, like at the CEO level, but also you got to make sure that you're tracking the right KPIs at every tier all the way down to your individual queries to your database,
Yep.
because everybody has a function and an ability to hook into those KPIs. Like it's almost performance as a service. I've got to be able to say that for my role, I don't, as a software engineer, I don't and shouldn't be held accountable for the number of applications that were taken in a given month. That seems ridiculous, right? But I can be held accountable for the average transaction time on a service that's under my purview that I build.
Mm-hmm.
Which ultimately, if you're doing the right things and organizing your work in the right way, ultimately that does influence the number of applications that are taken on a given day or a given month.
But what you just said there is an important differentiator. understanding where you have influence and understanding where you have ownership are two different things, and you manage to those differently.
So I'm making a note now. We should do an episode in the very near future about KPIs and RACI, so the
I
responsible,
like it.
accountable, etc.
Yeah.
I'm not going to give away the secret sauce because we're at 30 minutes, but I think we should do that. So maybe that's episode 32. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's somewhere in the future. But stay tuned as we both figure that out. So we're at the end of our time here today. Really enjoyed this episode. Enjoyed making it. I think maybe you caught us on a good coffee day. It's actually still AM here in the great state of Tennessee. But in any case, if you've made it this far, thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in. If you have any other thoughts about a culture of quality, I'm really interested to hear them, especially from those that have seen quality go in a positive direction or quality go in a negative direction. What do you think causes that? And how do you manage to that or manage through that? So if you haven't already, you made it to the end, go ahead, like and subscribe, whether you're watching us on YouTube or you're listening to us on your podcast platform of choice. There's always some way to engage. We like reviews. We like the shares as well. So thanks for listening to us. This has been Plays Well with Others, episode 31. And thanks for listening.